Yes, so today our presentation is titled Developing a School-Level Blended Learning Working Group, and it's going to be presented by all of us. Myself, I'm Wesley Toronjo, and with me are Helen Nichols, Gary Saunders, and Karina O'Reilly. So we'll all be presenting, each of us taking turns on a slide, and each slide will address a separate question. So here's a bit of a presentation roadmap for us. We will have a slide on why and how did the Blended Learning Working Group get started, a slide on what are the theoretical and pedagogical justifications for the group, and also what are some topics and issues that the group has explored so far, and finally we'll discuss what's next for the group. So to get us started.
Brilliant, thank you, Wes. So yeah, one of the interesting things about the Blended Learning Working Group is the nature of where we've all come from. So Wes and Karina actually joined us during the pandemic, which is kind of relevant to what we're going to talk to you about today. So over the course of the pandemic, we in the School of Social and Political Sciences at Lincoln experienced a really distinct fast forward, as everyone else did, in the use of digital learning tools. And this was at a really rapid rate. And what we identified was that colleagues were required to upskill and learn new technologies at the same time as delivering those programs online in a way that we hadn't done before, or certainly to that extent before. So this group, which is formed of the four of us, it formed as a process of reflection because we realised that we needed to store and capture what we'd learnt very, very quickly and so much over the course of that period of time. What was working well for staff and students, and of course what wasn't, and also the challenges that have been faced over that period of time, and in particular challenges for different colleagues who were maybe coming in at different points, who had different digital competencies when the pandemic began. So within the school, because we had a mixture of different abilities and knowledges around digital learning tools and digital technologies, and we were working at different levels with different kinds of experiences depending on where we'd come from previously. We needed to take stock of that and think about the fact that some colleagues were perhaps more digitally fit than others. And by fit, I mean able to very quickly adapt to and learn new digital learning tools in comparison to others who had not had as much experience in using those kinds of facilities. So because of the need to support colleagues more and work together and identify best practice, we thought that the best way to do this was via a group approach. And rather than relying solely on the digital lead in the school, for example, we wanted this to be something that looked collaborative and was collaborative in nature in terms of that support. So as a blended learning working group, there are four of us who provide the space in which to discuss our digital learning practices, to capture those best practices from across the school, and also to provide advice and guidance to colleagues across the school in a collaborative group-based way, as opposed to a single colleague delivering that by themselves. And I'm going to pass over to Gary.
Okay, thanks for that, Wes and Helen. So the Blended Learning Working Group is grounded in student as producer, and student as producer takes its starting point is the something very special and unique about universities, and that is that they are places wherein new knowledge, new processes, new technologies are created, reflected upon and disseminated. And that's done by teaching and research put together in what's referred to as scholarship. And scholarship includes everybody within the university, academics, professional staff, and students. And its starting point is that we all have a lot to learn from each other. And that is where this Blended Learning Working Group starts from. And that's underpinned pedagogically by the work of Lev Vygotsky, and particularly this notion of working with more knowledgeable others. And what this group did using that philosophy is to put people with more knowledgeable others about the development of blended learning within the curriculum. And that includes staff and students. And the things that are discussed in the blended learning working group are also discussed with students in course rep meetings, so we can get feedback about some of the work that we are doing around blended learning. And that was particularly the case during the pandemic, where we worked very closely with students to develop blended learning within the School of Social and Political Sciences. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Gary. So what I wanted to talk about really was a little bit about some of the issues that we've looked at as a group so far. And probably the most important way of speaking about this is talking about the context in which it's taken place. So the context of accessibility refers to from both students and from staff. When we think about the context of accessibility from the students, the shift to digital and hybrid for students increased cognitive load to an extent. There were greater demands on students' time, but also on their energy and also on their abilities. Some students we assumed had more digital access and knowledge than perhaps they had. Most of us are aware of an increase, anecdotally at least, in mental health issues among students, which is unsurprising when we consider some of the isolation that they've gone through, and less access to direct support as well, especially that kind of face-to-face stuff. So we can expect some of our students to be struggling more with areas where they normally expect to have a certain amount of one-to-one support. We also need to think about that in the context of undiagnosed specific learning difficulties, which are very common, especially in students from non-traditional backgrounds. It can be quite expensive and difficult to get diagnosed with dyslexia and other difficulties as an adult. Many don't know how. Many staff don't really know how to signpost students or how to spot these issues as well. So there is potential exclusion that we need to bear in mind. But we also need to think about, and something that the working group took on board right from the very beginning, was the context of this for staff as well. So we also had, as we were all well aware, had vastly increased workloads, and much greater difficulty in giving one-to-one support, where teams could be very useful for this. There is a difference in the kind of support that staff can give through teams and the support they can give one-to-one. And that limited face-to-face time could make a real difference in terms of how to spot issues developing with students. So accessibility in this context is something that we need to look at as something that's beneficial to everybody, and something that we need to think of in terms of a ground level standard, something that we all need to be supplying, if you like, to all of everything that we do, rather than something that's a bolt on that we give to students with pass plans. So part of what the group did then was to talk about how to support staff rather than forcing staff into making changes. Upskilling, as Helen mentioned, giving support, providing how-to guides, including how to do things like make more accessible PowerPoints and how to build that into the way that we work already, rather than changing everything, how to use Turnitin to its best. And at the away day, as a group, we were able to present on some of these issues, including demonstrating what not to do with things like PowerPoint, which was useful and also a lot of fun. And finally, as a group, we're able to review digital resources, and that's something that's ongoing, and something that we can do as a group that perhaps was much easier as a group than to do as the work of a single digital lead. Talking of which, now over, I think, to our digital lead.
Thanks very much. So as a way of ending this presentation, I want to talk briefly about more or less what's next for the Blended Learning Working Group, which is it's really a matter of a combination of meetings, workshops, one-to-one support, and some sort of formalized outputs. Meetings in terms of having this space, the necessary component of meetings, but whether they're both planned and ad hoc, and offer this collaborative approach for developing best practices, sharing ideas, building ideas together, but also planning training through things like workshops providing this space for learning skills, making sure that we know how to do things as a school, but also thinking through different things, thinking through ideas and collaborating and working creatively together, but for the core purpose or the main purpose of learning skills like adding captions to lectures and making sure that we know exactly how to do so. But also offering, in addition to workshops, one-to-one support. And the idea here is having a sort of network of ad hoc assistance, assistance as needed from a group instead of just an individual. And this is sort of a way of having more individuals accessible for offering different levels of support and being able to share our skills in different ways. And lastly, this idea of trying to come up with formalized outputs in terms of communicating that a certain baseline for digital preparedness, making sure that everyone is receiving communications, which will typically come from myself as digital lead, but be developed through meetings and workshops and these supports, so that everyone is receiving information about what that digital preparedness baseline might be, but also understanding and being aware of different routes for improving skills. And we'll stop it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation this afternoon. We've had quite a few questions come in. I know you've answered some of them as we've been going. One in particular was, how did you work with the central digital education team to make sure you were complementing and working together rather than overlapping? Okay, Helen?
I could take that one. So I mean, we've particularly during the pandemic and before, we've had a consistently good working relationship with the central team. So when Gary was student engagement lead, he's now director of teaching and learning, and I was director of teaching and learning. We already had an ongoing working relationship because we're interested in student engagement and the kind of themes that Dan and Mike and others are interested in. So we've often worked with them already in relation to things that they're working on. So there was already an open dialogue there with them. And so this was a natural progression from that. And actually, we invited them to present certain elements of the Teaching and Learning Away Day for us. So this is separate. It's an in-house mechanism of support, but we do draw advice and guidance and support from the central team as well. So it does kind of join up. So there's potential overlap, but it's overlap in a good way because it's reinforcement. I didn't know if there's anything else anybody wanted to add to that.
So another good question here then is, one I was thinking of actually is this a model now you're looking to promote in other schools, and have other schools, taken this on? And somebody wants to steal it already.
So I suppose the reason I'm speaking is because I initiated this when I was director of teaching and learning, but Wesley has since become the digital lead in the school. At the time, Wesley wasn't the digital lead. So I suppose in terms of the future direction, I'll pass over to Wesley if this to respond to that in relation to whether this is something he intends to share with other schools in terms of how this progresses and promoting that to share practice in other schools about a group approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting idea. But yeah, as far as sharing it or showing it as a model, I mean, I think there's perhaps interesting opportunities in my role as digital lead to share practices with the other digital leads, and that might be a more or less the ideal route to offer these types of sort of the model into the structure and be able to explain it over our meetings and the other ways that the digital leads communicate.